잘 들리십니까?
Can you hear me well? We will now begin the day 3, session 1 of the 2021 Korea KGFP. The title of this session is Gaeseong Industrial Complex and Peace in Northeast Asia. I am the moderator of the session. My name is Yoo Bung-moon and I'm from Gaeseong Industrial District Foundation. For today's panel discussion, with the title of the Gaeseong Industrial Complex and Peace and Unification in Northeast Asia, we have invited the excellent scholars and also experts, and they're going to share with us their insight and understanding. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we are holding this forum in hybrid format with on-site audiences as well as some of the audiences are joining online. So if you are joining us virtually, then please click the link at the bottom of your screen if you do have any questions. When we talk about the Gaeseong Industrial Complex and the peace, in fact, the key word for us is the peace. And we are currently living in the world of hyperconnectivity. So Gaeseong, Seoul, and Pyongyang. You see that these are the cities in small Asian nations. So you may think that this is something that happens and that's limited only to extremely local areas of the world. But because we are living in an era of hyperconnectivity, what happens in Korea and Northeast Asia can have ramifications across the world. So the Gaeseong Industrial Complex, the initiative that launched the Gaeseong Industrial Complex. So in order to establish the Gaeseong Industrial Complex, in fact, the 60,000 military troops were withdrawn, and then in that space, we created the Gaeseong Industrial Complex. So if it was established with the originally planned site of about 20 million pyong, then only with the North Korean people, they cannot really operate that vast area. So the Kim Jong-il, the then leader of North Korea, said that he's going to turn the military troops to the civilians to operate the Gaeseong Industrial Complex. So this means that the establishment and the operation of the Gaeseong Industrial Complex can contribute to the easing of tensions on the Korean peninsula in a dramatic way. So you see that the 60,000 soldiers who are located in the border area in North Korea, they are withdrawn to the deeper side of North Korea. So this can contribute greatly to the easing of tension. So let's put ourselves in the position of North Korea. Let's say that if North Korea is better off than Korea, then South Korea, can it be really generous enough to withdraw its troops and open its border for economic cooperation? So I think that we really have to understand the perspectives of North Korean people and the North Korean regime. So in that sense, we do have a great of the panelists. So we have the experts from various organizations, and they will give us their perspectives. We have the representative of the Korean American Association, like the chairman of the Coast Group, as well as president of KAPAC and Korean Women's Movement for Peace. So I'd like to make a few housekeeping announcements before we start the main part of the panel session. So for the schedule. So we will first hear from the Kim Young-un, president of the Korea Logistics Forum, for his presentation. Following that, we are going to have the panel discussions. So the Choi Gang-cheol, president of CAPAC, will give us a presentation. And then the Chun Yong-soo, chairman of the Coast Group, he is actually in Australia, so he's joining us virtually, and he will give us a presentation. And then last but not least, the Cho Young-mi, executive director of the Korea Women's Movement for Peace, will give us the presentations. So after listening to all the presenters and panelists, and if time is allowed, then we'll entertain several questions from the audiences on YouTube. So we start this discussion at 10:40, and this will continue by 12:10. Now we will begin the discussion, the panel session. But before that, I would like to introduce to you our panelists. And then I will give the microphone to the presenters. So first, let me introduce the first speaker. Kim Young-yoon, president of the Korea Logistics Forum, is going to give us the presentation, the first presentation, on the Gaeseong Industrial Complex and Inter-Korean cooperation. He got his PhD in economics in a German university, and then since then he served as a president of the North Korean Peace Research Institute, and currently he's serving as the president of Korea Logistics Forum. He's engaged in various activities to promote peace and cooperation on the Korean Peninsula. So why don't you give him a round of applause?
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be given this opportunity to make presentation. Because of the time constraint, I'll just start my presentation without further ado. What I'm going to share with you today is about the peace cooperation in Northeast Asia and the Gaeseong Industrial Complex. My idea is as follows. When we talk about the economic cooperation and peace creation in Northeast Asia, we know that that has not actually happened so far, to our surprise. I think it's very strange. But I think that probably Gaeseong Industrial Complex will be the starting point to have the peace creation of Northeast Asia. That's my point. So I would like to talk about what we can do in order to achieve this goal. So that's the purpose of my presentation. I actually have many slides in my presentation, so I'm going to speed up now. If you look at the history of our governments in the South Korea, we had a lot of initiatives for the peace creation. We used to have the Northeast Asia Eurasia Peace Cooperation Initiative. And also, have you heard of 동북책, which is the acronym for the Northeast Asia Plus Responsible Community? We also had the Korean Peninsula Northeast Asia Economy Initiative, and also the community building. So the idea and goal was to build the country with Northeast Asia Logistics Centered one. I started to have this position since 2009, and also when we had the 14th Korea Logistics Forum academic conference, we had this idea at that point as well. Let's look at the past history with all the presidents and the governments. All of them had their initiatives for the North Korea without any exception. There were too many. My feeling is that the Park Geun-hye administration was the most active one, and also Moon Jae-in administration, which is the current one, is also as active as Park Geun-hye administration. If you look at the slide here, this is a very audacious plan. So we are trying to cover the whole continent, even Europe. So we have a lot of ideas, for example, the flying out into the areas, as well as the railroad. We also had this kind of initiative as well. This is all about connection. As you see here. Also, by region, we also had the division of the plans of making development, and that was splendid. That sounded splendid. Also, we had a lot of news coverage that the government is going to make the spearhead in these initiatives, and also Ulaanbaatar Inland Railroad would be constructed in order to have the hub of the construction and building in the Korean Peninsula. Let's look at this. Isn't it amazing and very splendid? And also the news article says that according to the minister, we're going to be the center of the peace of the Northeast Asia. This is also a copy of the announcement by the government. We also had meetings actually. That was the things that happened in 2015 alone. You must be familiar with this picture. This is the new economy initiative by this administration. This is about connecting the railroad with the northern part of the area. This might be explaining the benefits of having these activities. We might also have the community for the cooperation with the northern areas. And also this is the new idea, and the new person has just started to have the hat for this responsibility. Also, we have the logistics that have to be covered in the North Korea, and also the gas business will be starting. Also, the building of the hub area will be made for the natural gas as well. Connecting what happened in the Park Geun-hye administration, this administration is also trying to achieve those goals. So maybe North Korea can be also part of it even today. So if they want to share the benefits, that's our idea. So the whole idea is about making the cooperation, right? We can also add this Kwangdong area as well. In more detail, they were also talking about the 3 belts, 3 economic zones to connect all these areas. In summary, I can tell you that the starting point of the Northeast Asia Peace and Cooperation is to make the building of the network of the logistics and infrastructure to connect to all the parts of the Northeast Asia. And that's the essence, I believe. Therefore, I believe that the logistics connection between North and South Korea will be the basis. But how can we achieve this? And also, if that's not possible, what is the reason behind? And the reason behind this is because this is to have always the connection directly between North and South Korea. That's not possible. That's not possible because of this picture alone. Actually, this is the scene where I served as a military person when I was very young. So you have to cross these lines, right? How is it possible? So what I'm trying to say here is that the most realistic and core challenge of the starting of the peace and cooperation of Northeast Asia is to reopen the Gaeseong Industrial Complex, if we really have to. We have to reactivate the Gaeseong Industrial Complex in order to enter into the industry of the region of this North Korea. Why? We might think that Gaeseong Industrial Complex is only about the production of goods. However, it is beyond that. It has a lot of more meaning beyond that. I used to study in Germany, so I'd like to give you an analogy of what happened in Germany. Berlin is quite similar to the current North and South Korea and also the Gaeseong Industrial Complex. They had, in the past, West Berlin and East Berlin, but many people resided in the western part. Therefore, they had problems of the commuting. They had to clear up the roads for the commuters. That made people in the East and West Germany to talk. They had to talk. Why don't we have this analogy? Germany had this communications and transportation situations for the excuses of discussing and talking. That can be same in Korea. If you see this, they had 40 railroads, 30 high-speed roads, and they had 3 hubs of the airplane routes. That was after the division. Before that, they used to have 140 district roads. That is why they started to have the transit visa. The visa allowed them to move across the East and West Germany freely, as long as they had the visa. Starting with this visa system, East Germany wanted to be recognized as an official state by connecting itself to West Germany. That is why they allowed to have this transportation agreement. So transit agreement was made in the way that there is no arrest of the travelers and no search for the belongings. After having more than 60 times of the discussions for 2 years, they agreed on the transit agreement and transportation agreement. Even foreigners like me were able to cross the border to get to East Germany. I was able to do that. In order to do that, many efforts have been made. Joint community and communique was also made. So the joint committee was held for making all these initiatives. A lot of supports had to be made. That was inevitable because of the poorer situation in East Germany. They had no recourse but to give the support to East Germany. So were they problematic free? No, they had problems. They actually used this route as the exit road as well for the people in East Germany to try to exit their state. So they had to sometimes cover up the areas as well. The essence here is that this kind of transportation connection was contributing to the unification of Germany. Communications were started because of these initiatives, and dialogues and communications were leading to the way for the unification. So therefore, I think that the transportation policy was a pivotal factor for the unification and opening. So I emphasize the importance of the transportation and opening transportation. Now, coming back to Korea, what can we do? July 2007, I visited North Korea. Then I was accompanied by the President N of the SME. The person that was actually almost at the end of the period of Doon as president. It was almost at the end of the term. At that time, economy for shipping was flourishing. The docks in Korea were full. We had to go to Yantai in China. So this is what you're looking at. That was the time in 2007. They had to borrow the land in Yantai port in order to build our ships. So I was accompanied by Mr. N of the SME, and we were meeting with other counterparts in this area. And also, we went to the factory of Taesuri in Yeongnam. The pastry factory in Yeongnam was the place we visited. That was in the afternoon of the day. The president of factory said that they want to have a new building of the shipyard by deconstructing the whole factory of pastry. Because technology was so high, it was possible to just put that into the 7 or 5 different sections, and then all these transportation will be made from south. So with that condition, I have some asking for you. We have to have the transportation made for the materials and personnel for the next 24 hours through the onland. That was the first condition he asked. Also, the factory supervisor of Pesuri also asked a second request, and the second request was that we have to make it possible for our ship owner to visit your shipyard after getting down on this Sunan airport. So Mr. N was not able to give the answer or guarantee, but he really wanted to do that, but he was not the responsible person. However, what happened afterwards, historically, you know that kind of request was obliterated by the proceedings of history afterwards. But they had the incident under the president, and also we had no problems afterwards. What I felt at that time was that the transportation is really important. Connection will be the starting point, and that would be the really essential part of our future progress. We used to have all these kinds of plans at that time. And also the public infrastructure is an exception for the sanctions to North Korea. Still, we cannot achieve this at all. Even if we want to achieve the peace in the Northeast Asia. The one stumbling block we have physically is North Korea. We have to overcome the issue of North Korea. In order to do that, what I suggest here is that we have to have a fundamental change. It will not be happening at all if we do not change anything at all. So we have to take North Korea presence as granted. And we have to find other routes as well. So we have to change our thought. What I'm telling you here is that we have to have a declaration of reopening Gaeseong Industrial Complex. There will be a lot of disagreements. There will be a lot of voices against it. But declaration itself will make its own way. After making declaration, probably many other things will happen in order to achieve it. So in order to have the physical possibility of having the logistics exchanges, we have to have the diplomatic engagements from other countries only after having the declaration. De facto unification is something that we have to have initially. De facto unification means that people can move around freely between the two countries, and also we have to have the businesses for traveling as well. We have to put our all efforts on these issues. Ladies and gentlemen, don't you think that this is the thing we have to do right now? Don't you think that this is the vision of the relationship of the North and South Korea? Why is it that in reality that we cannot go to our neighboring region, North Korea, when we can go anywhere else in the world? If you go to the Seoul station, you have to be able to see this kind of signboard at the station to be able to go to North Korea. If we have the logistics connection, we can go through not just the North Korea, but the Russia and Eurasia, as well as European continent. If we cannot achieve this goal, what can we do? I wish that we can achieve this connection in my own lifetime. I don't mean that we have to have an official unification. We can only have de facto unification. I believe that the de facto unification will just have the rush in of everything else that will change everything. The flow of change will come to us automatically. Everybody will rush to us to have business. Think about this. Every day, several thousands of people can reside and visit Pyongyang, and people are freely moving around north and south. Then that way, why young people will be worried about their job creation or having jobs? Do you think that this is a privilege? Do you think that this is unfair to call for this? The logistics demand for the North Korea and the northern part will be exponentially increasing, both in the inbound and outbound demand for the logistics. The industry will be growing dramatically. I am sure investments will flow in. The government will also have other countries to come in. The U.S. business people will come to the Korean Peninsula, especially for North Korea. The fourth industrial revolution is not an exception. What do you want to do now? The top decision maker of the country should make this decision, because we cannot know, you cannot know. With courage, we have to make bold decision. So the presidential hopefuls for the next presidential election should think about this, should have this in mind. So we have to have the condition to North Korea to have our wishes done. This is my conclusion and summary. I said that the starting point of the peace and cooperation in the Northeast Asia is building the logistics and infrastructure network to connect Northeast Asia. That requires physical connection of the North and South Korea, and we have to be present in the industry of the northern part of the peninsula. The only thing to achieve all these goals is to have the declaration of reopening Gaeseong Industrial Complex. And even today and now, the president should make the decision that we have to go for the de facto unification. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your passionate presentation. So, summarizing what I said, there are critical tools for the peaceful unification and also peace in Northeast Asia, and one of the way is not to start from Northeast Asia and link the two Koreas. Rather, our starting point will reverse. So, starting from the Korean Peninsula, starting from the cooperation between the two Koreas, then we can expand the peace throughout Northeast Asia. So, rather than trying to resolve the North Korea's nuclear issues before opening ourselves up for economic cooperation, we have to first initiate the economic cooperation activities, and only then the North Korea's nuclear issues can be naturally resolved. And therefore, for this, he emphasized the importance of reopening of the Gaeseong Industrial Complex. He also shared with us his personal experiences of serving in military on the barbed wire line, and so you know that in Korea we do have this barbed wire around the DMZ. But when we look at the borderline between North Korea and China, in fact, the borderline is the river, the stream that flows between the both countries. And there was a power plant, and that borderline itself was shared by the two countries. So this shows that the borderline is not just a line of division, but it's the line of sharing and connection. Next, I would like to invite the second speaker, Choi Kwang-chul, President of CAPAC. President Choi has been engaged in the campaign to reconnect South and North Korea, and he has been involved in the various activities to pass the legislation, let's say, for the reunion of the separate families, and also to enhance cooperation with North Korea. He has been serving in various positions. So, President Choi, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. Especially, I'd like to express my gratitude to our on-site participants, as well as the participants who are joining us virtually. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I hope that you all stay safe and well despite the COVID pandemic. My father, he passed away February this year, and I was in the self-quarantine in Korea, so I could not be with him in his deathbed. And so I was so sorry and so sad. And that's why I sent a letter to the U.S. congressman that the ban on traveling must be lifted. But then, under the Biden administration, again, that ban was extended by September 2022. So I believe that for those who want to make a visit to North Korea, many of them are frustrated and disappointed. And this again shows how difficult and bumpy path we have ahead of us. So I'm not an expert in inter-Korean cooperation, but I want to talk about how the Gaeseong Industrial Complex and its resumption can spark cooperation between the two Koreas, and also how can we serve the interests of the U.S. as well as South and North Korea. And I believe that this kind of perception has to be spread to the mainstream society of the United States. And for this, I have been engaged in various efforts to raise public awareness, particularly among Americans. So why can't we resolve our issues on our own among ourselves? The current situation is really frustrating. And I believe that that frustration is shared not just among Korean people living in Korea, but also many Korean Americans. And this is because the U.S. has become a main player, especially after North Korea developed the nuclear program. The U.S. Intervened in the situation in a very deeper way, and the U.S. now has become a main player. But if the problem is that the U.S. has a very negative bias against North Korea. They don't treat them as a counterparty for diplomatic dialogue. Rather, they believe North Korea is the axis of evil and a rogue state that needs to be punished. And those kind of perceptions have been widespread and deep-rooted in the minds of many American people. And also the U.S. legislative and the executive branches, many of the political heavyweights, they have a very hawkish, neoconservative mindset. And these have affected their perceptions toward North Korea. So in the United States, I know that there are more than 20 million experts in the Korean Peninsula, and also we have thousands of experts on the Korean Peninsula in Korea, and also in other Asian countries. And I believe that we really have to muster our heads together in order to find a new breakthrough out of this frustrating situation. So although I'm not an expert in the Gaeseong Industrial Complex issues, but I understand that in order to resolve the issues of Gaeseong Industrial Complex, we need efforts in broader level. So I understand that you all know APAC. So 6 million Jewish people living in the state. They have formed their own coalition. And also in the United States, we have a lot of Korean descendants, and they are the good citizens, taxpayers. And I thought that following the example of the Jewish people, the Korean people should also form their coalition, and they have to raise their voices for the interest of the Korean Peninsula. So that's why we formed the KPAC. And I would like to share with you the activities that we have engaged and pursued. As you know, the public diplomacy is now emerging. I don't have time to explain what it is about, but we especially focus on diaspora public diplomacy because the Korean descendants living in America are not the ones who just left Korea for their own benefit only. Rather, they are the ones who have understandings both in the country of their residence and also their mother nations. And in the sense, they are very valuable diplomatic assets. And we have to foster a lot of private diplomats and ambassadors of Korea. And in this sense, I believe that we can make use of these Korean descendants living in America. So here you can see the several major issues regarding the Korean Peninsula that garner the interest of the American people. So the strengthening of the Korea-US alliance, the human rights issues in North Korea, and even like the law that banned the spread of the anti-North Korea propaganda leaflets, establishing the liaison office between North Korea and the U.S. So there are several issues that can be easily dealt with, but when it comes to the establishment of the liaison office or the end of war declaration, these are very, very divisive, and it's very difficult to challenge that. So for in order to resolve these difficult issues, we have to show more proactive efforts. So the APAC, as I said, the Jewish people, they came together in order to fight for the interests of Israel. So they actively communicate with and they visit the U.S. Congress as well as the civic groups in the U.S. to promote the Jewish interest. But the problem in Korea is that we haven't had the pivot point that can serve the Korea's interest in the U.S. Congress. In other words, there were very, very few people, political heavyweights, and the Capitol Hill who understand the history of the Korean Peninsula, complicated relationship among to Korea, China, and Japan, and therefore advocate for dialogue with North Korea and peace. But today the things have changed, and a lot of groups and the organizations were formed to promote Korea's interest in the United States. So we also have the local chapters of the Korean organizations.
제가 10분, 12분에 한정돼 있어서 빨리 넘기겠습니다. 그래서 저희들이 하는 것들이 지난 수년
So these are the activities that we have done. For example, like we visit the congressman's DC office, or we organize this kind of local gatherings, policy meetings, and also we encourage the members of Congress to organize this kind of town hall meetings focusing on Korean issues. And the members of the Federal Congress, as well as the U.S. politicians, they lend a serious ear to the voices of constituents or supporters. So you have to be supporters and constituents in order to attract their attention. That's why we are engaged in various sponsorship activities for President Biden. And we raise our voices through these sponsor activities. And also, we encourage the members of the Federal Congress to send a letter to the U.S. President calling for the need to organize the reunion between the separate families. And also, when Japan imposed retaliatory economic restrictions against South Korea, we sent this kind of letter to the U.S. government to resolve the issues. And also, together with the Congressman Brad Sherman and Andrew Kim, we organized this kind of meeting. And Ms. Kim Ji-na, Mr. Yu Sang-won, and also Mr. Chung Gi-sub, and Kim Ha-gun directors, all of them participated in this symposium. When I first organized the symposium, I wasn't really aware of the significance of this meeting, but then after hosting this symposium, I deeply realized how important this meeting was. And I realized that this meeting should not be ended as a one-off event. Rather, it should be the part of the continuous, relentless efforts to resume the operation of the industrial complex. And yesterday, I had an opportunity to meet and talk with the Mr. Chung Se-yeon, and so we really have to have these kind of opportunities to meet with the political heavyweights, to have our voices heard. And you all know about this resolution on the end of the Korean War, and it was signed by many congressmen, both from the Republican and the Democratic parties. Although it failed to be submitted to the Congress session, but I believe that this is truly a historical milestone. And also, when the U.S. congressman was trying to pass the law that destroyed the truth of the anti-North Korean leaflet, we initiated a campaign to spread the truth about this law and to point out the problems of this law. And this year, we held the public hearing on human rights issues, and that became an opportunity for us to further spread this campaign. And not just we ourselves, the Korean members of the Korean National Assembly, they also paid a visit to us and joined their hands and efforts with us. And here, Yesterday, the Endivix, the Republican congressman, he finally put his signature on this bill, the Peace on the Korean Peninsula Act. And I think it's truly a blessing. I was really, really stressed out in order to get his signature. I really wanted to submit this bill to the 116th session, but somehow the progress was so delayed and protracted because the U.S. Has to deal with so many issues at this moment, including the Taliban, and because of that, the Korean issue has been sort of put on the back burner. So it was very difficult to draw the interest of the U.S. congressman, but finally we got his signature yesterday. And also the Brett Sherman, in front of the Korean media, he promised that he will submit the bill. His goal is to submit the bill to the diplomatic committee within this autumn session this year. In fact, in the past, the U.S. Congress had only a single stance when it comes to its policy toward North Korea. In other words, they only had the neoconservative policies. But now, we are trying to break and shake this deep-rooted perception, and we are trying to create a breakthrough through this bill. So please pray for this. And last but not least, I would like to make some suggestions to Korean National Assembly. You know, like the peace process on the Korean Peninsula, it had somehow lost the public attention. But I believe that in order to ensure the permanent peace on the Korean Peninsula and everlasting success of Southern North Korea, I believe that this peace agenda must remain high in the political agenda. And also, as for the declaration on the end of the Korean War, if the resolution is not passed in the National Assembly, then I think that's really a shame. And if such bill is not passed at the Korean National Assembly, how can we get the support from the U.S. Congress, and how can we expect that the U.S. congressmen will pass this bill? And therefore, in the sense, I believe the Korean politicians should redouble their efforts in this matter. And also regarding the industrial complex, again, we held the public hearing, and currently we are organizing another round of the conference in order to talk about the importance of the reopening of the industrial complex and why we have to reopen it. So I will continue to organize this kind of events in order to raise public awareness. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Choi. That was a good information. Diaspora public diplomacy was amazing, and also the committee in the U.S. that has been made so far is something that we have to refer to. The Jewish is taking up the 3% of the population in the U.S., but having the 80% of the wealth in the U.S. If you go to the Congress, the senators are also with the majority of the Jewish. The example is Biden. We have had a lot of goods and bad things from the diaspora public diplomacy, which was spearheaded by the Jewish in the U.S. We understand that. Out of his remark, the issue of the Korean Peninsula should be tackled in various levels in order to convince the U.S. Also, the Korean government and the National Assembly should be joining hands together to have the declaration of the Korean peace, but there is no support coming from the Korean National Assembly. In that sense, it is absurd for us to ask for something from the U.S. When there is a meeting with the Christopher Hill, who was the leader of the six-party talks, Christopher Hill said this as follows: "Why do you people say yes and yes only? When you come to the U.S., you have to make a decision since this is about your own country." The participant in the meeting with the Christopher Hill was very embarrassed by hearing that. So when we talk about DPs, we have the inter-Korean relations, but we also have the nuclear issues, which is a global issue. And the influence of the U.S. is undeniable. If you want to change the politics in the U.S., they have to change the administration, but they also have to change the Congress, media, and the public perception. Therefore, that requires multilateral approaches to the U.S. As Mr. Choi mentioned, there are many people in the U.S. as Korean diaspora who's working so hard. I should say that we have to take the model after what is happening in the U.S. Thank you very much for the wonderful remark. Now we have Mr. Chan from Australia. We have to connect him online. I wonder if it's ready. So it is my honor to welcome Mr. Chun Yong-soo, chairman of the Coast Group. He's going to talk about the Inter-Korean Economic Cooperation with Gaeseong Industrial Complex. He actually, in 1951, he started the SBK, which is a dispatching company to the West for the first time as Korean. He's now having business in Australia. He has been awarded many times for his lifetime achievement for the contribution to the inter-Korean relations. And also he was awarded as a Korean business person overseas. Also, he was also awarded by the government for the Medal of the Contribution to the National Merit. So he has a very splendid career. Also, he was suggested to have the investment for a joint venture in 2010 by the North Korea, so he's now doing the consulting job as well for the inter-Korean relations. Please welcome him with a big round of applause. Thank you very much, and very nice to see you all. It is my honor and pleasure to be participating in this Global Forum for Peace as discussant. Thank you very much for the warm introduction. Very nice to see Mr. Kim Jin-hyang and also Mr. Kim Young-yoon. Thank you very much for their contribution. Mr. Choi Kang-chul has been also talking about what is happening and the problems, stumbling blocks in the U.S. as well. And also, we have been very much indebted by those remarks that I had learned from a lot. As for me, after the reopening of the Gaeseong Industrial Complex, what will happen to the inter-Korean relations and economic cooperation? That's my topic today. And from 1991 until today, I have been doing business in 5 cities in the North Korea, including Pyongyang. Especially in 1994, I was also establishing a foreign investment company in the U.S. as well until the economic cooperation between the two Koreas stopped in 2009. I was in the leadership of such business circle for doing the business relations with the North Korea. My discussion today will be based on my experience accordingly. Currently, we are in a straining position for the inter-Korean relations. However, what I have to say here is that the economic cooperation between the two Koreas is something that we must achieve and we will achieve. I am quite sure about that. Even if we start the economic cooperation between the two Koreas, we should not fail again and we should do it successfully. In order to do that, from 1991 to 2009, we have about 17 years of history of having the economic cooperation as business between the two Koreas. What I'm going to tell you today is the analysis of what had happened during that time period so that we can take the lessons from. Generally speaking, when we have the trade businesses, we need to have a lot of complementary issues as well. Because of my time constraint, I cannot give you the details, but there are a lot of necessities to start a logistics business relations. Currently, looking back in the history, we know that in the logistics, they had only one route coming from the Namgu port in the North Korea. Of course, there are other vessels for the coals or other goods using the Pohang port and others, but we only had the Nampo port officially. In Nampo port alone, there was only one shipping company. Therefore, the logistics cost was so high. If you, for example, have the vessel coming from the western side of the US to come to Korea, it takes about 15 days. Our logistics fee using the Nampo port was much higher than the cost and charge used for the 15-day journey from the US. That should be corrected. That is because we were using only one port in Nampo and Incheon. Sometimes we had some waiting time, which is so long offshore Incheon area. That was a problem. I know that there are many other ports in Korea which are very much developed, like the Pyeongtaek port. Diversification is needed for the number of the ports here. If and when we have the reopening of the economic cooperation between the two Koreas, what should be corrected is the transportation of the inland transportation and the railroad. That is a must. What could be the biggest benefit or strength of having the inter-Korean relations and the movement? That is the fact that we are just one land. We're just divided, but we are actually one land geographically. So we have to take full use of it. And also we have to get ready for the entrance of the North Korean businesses as well. In the past, when we had the investment business in the North and South Korea, if we remember the cases in there, unfortunately, we were not enjoying any success at all. We only saw all the failures at that time because all the companies were working in North Korea at that time. Based on our actual experience, the methodology, speed, and other facilities for the entrance into the business were just the recipe for failure. I knew that it would fail. I would like to just say a few words here rather than just the criticism. I would like to constructively mention that you should be cautious about the possibility. At that time, when we were doing the business there, we were just having the rosy picture only, but we have to have the analytical mind as well. At that time, we had only competition too fierce among all the players. They were just bleeding in terms of the price, so on. So we were just criticized for having excessive assistance to North Korea, which was a misunderstanding of our business practices. Maybe that was the reason why we were not successful. Therefore, what is important when we are dealing with the North Korea is to remember the fact that the North Korea is a socialist country, not a democratic country. We have to understand what socialist means and what socialist structure is about before doing business with them. We need to study by ourselves. I cannot give you all the structures of the socialist state, but simply speaking, they have their budget made for the year after, and they have to execute as planned. For example, if there is a mine A, they have the ores coming out from there, minerals, and the minerals are to be excavated and then they have to be exported and they have to be exchanged with the shoes for all the population. And that is following exactly the plans made year before. So how much should be exported out of the minerals and what could be the sum of the money. And that exact amount should be calculated into the amount needed for the production of shoes for the people. Also, the mines and factories of the minerals should be matching with all other companies that are working as counterpart companies. They're all centralized planning system, but they also have the diversified system of working with their partners. I know that there is also a change in the North Korea nowadays, but that's the principle. Without knowing their execution by budget or by plan, we cannot do business with them successfully. I don't know about the legal system of the North Korea that much, but starting from 1995 until today, in the North Korea, they have the combined business, and I have doing the combined business there. However, I have never had any strike or sabotage or demonstration by the employees in the company. I have never had a case of having the problems with the workers. They were working so hard. I valued their spirit very much because I've never seen any other better spirit as workers in other countries. Also in China, North Korean employees are working in China in order to manage the factory. I see clearly the difference between Chinese people and North Korean people when they're managing the factory. North Korean workers are doing so well in the management of the factory, leaving no concerns or problems so far. You have to be mindful about that as well. What I overheard about North Korea nowadays is that in South Korea they had a investment of by a company at the amount of 65 trillion won. I learned from the news that actually they were having the factory in the vicinity of my factory, which is a little bit south of my factory. I was able to witness the factory passing by. 2 years in the beginning were okay. They were looking very well. However, after 2 years, they had the problems in the operation of the factory because of the stoppage of the raw materials coming in. So that was also a result of mistake they made. So they had to deal with the system with China. They didn't get any preparation for having business with China as intermediary as well. They didn't have any understanding about the possible risks and problems in China. So South Korean people didn't know about anything what will be happening in there. So the failure was very obvious and evident. Preparation is really important. So probably the company got bankrupt because of the lack of preparation or preparedness. Also, when I heard many other companies working with North Korea up until recently, I learned the news also from the media. But one thing I have to tell you to know is that there is a window or the channel called Minpyeongyeon or the Civilian Economic Federation, which is controlling the whole activities with other countries. So that organization, Minpyeongyeon, is the only channel that you have to go through. Don't be fooled by any other pseudo organizations that emulate Minpyeongyeon, and that's the only one. So don't be deceived by other people. I can tell you all other tips. For example, the contract documents should be well examined if they are official and approved by the government of North Korea. So please leave no stone unturned. Also, when we deal with the North Korean people, you have to identify them very well. You have to know your client because you have to know which organization he's belonging to when he's talking with you. And also, if there is a company in North Korea, you have to know what would be the purpose of their use of their profits or proceeds out of their doing business. If you ask such questions, what is the purpose of using the money? They will tell you. They are supposed to tell you, frankly. They're also a sub-organization and the higher organization in the hierarchy of the North Korea. So you will know if there is a company in North Korea, if that is in the lower level of the organization or upper level, what is the linkage between all these organizations and the companies. So all the stakeholders must be egoistic. They have their own egoistic behavior as well. All the stakeholders' behavior should be understood by you as well. Now, I can tell you the success stories so far as well. Those companies that have been successful, although it's not South Korean company, it's North Korean company. So Pyeonghwa Automobile Company is one example, and that has been doing so well. All the management right has been transferred to North Korea. I know that after converting the ownership, they are doing business very well. They are making proceeds. The local residents were selected to become the CEOs. Actually, this current CEO is one of the local residents. That is also possible because there is nothing that we cannot do. Therefore, well-made agreement will lead to the good management. Communications matters a lot because without good communications and telecommunications, we cannot do the business. Also, you have to be able to understand the process of making contract. You should be very meticulous, very detail-oriented. And these things are very important for you to know. So you have to learn from mistakes from other people so far. So making investment into the economic cooperation, I can also give you some basic understanding. As you know, North Korea is mountainous area. Flat area is rare to find. All around the year, they have difficulty of finding food. They say that the food shortage is the problem. As you know, the 70% of the land is mountainous. Only 30% of the land is flat. Therefore, there cannot be enough crop naturally. The shortage should be imported from other countries. They need dollar for import. However, because of the sanctions and other difficulties, they cannot do it freely. They have a lot of volume of the trade. Actually, in the past, they didn't have any economic problems. In the past, when I was working with them about the trading, but with the economic sanction, now they must have difficulties. Speaking of mountains, there are really a lot of mountains there. I was also working with other geologists and experts to go to the mountains in North Korea. When I was there, the mountains in North Korea are rich of minerals like ores, zinc, thorium, and so on. And also the magnesite mine is also abundant there, which is avidly sought after by the U.S. If we are able to work with them for the natural materials like that, we might have a chance. And under the Nomu현 administration, we were able to also think of the special investment area in Tanchon area in the far north. I was very hopeful about having the excavation of the minerals together with North and South Korea. However, that project just subsided very regrettably. North Korea is also an agricultural society. They have the organic agriculture, smart farm is there, and also the regenerated seed production can be also possible there with the technology by the South Korea. As mentioned before, the productivity is quite high in North Korea, relatively speaking. So when we talk about the electronics or white goods production and the shoe industry that has been flourishing in South Korea can be also worked in the North Korea. They may be able to replace other factories in China, Vietnam, or Malaysia. That's also possible. North Korea also requires a lot of construction. They need road building. They need infrastructure. They need ports. As you also know very well, I told you that Nampo Port is the biggest and the almost only one with the economic booming of North Korea. In the future, we might need more ports. With the flourishing economy, what else they will need? They need more ports, so all the construction will be required there at that moment. Now, the paucity of electricity is the problem in North Korea. Therefore, the solar panel or the wind power generation will be very much interested by North Korea. Korean companies of that sort can enter North Korea for that business. Next one is tourism. Tourism can be developed further. The hotel business can be in North Korea as well. I recommend them to go to North Korea. Of course, this is the problem now because of the COVID-19 issue and pandemic. I was not able to visit January last year. Since then on, I am not able to get there. However, prior to that, actually there were a lot of passengers in the train from Tandung area. Chinese tourists were rushing into North Korea as tourists prior to COVID-19. At that time, the hotels were in shortage because they were not able to accommodate all the Chinese tourists alone. So they had to book the reservation 2 months before. European tourists were also visible as well. So if we have the inter-Korean business opening in the future, probably tourists can come back to North Korea because some of the areas are not subject to the UN sanctions. As mentioned earlier, logistics will be very promising. Because logistics business is quite doing well in South Korea, we can have a lot of chance to be more successful in both countries. I know that we have a lot of good things to be heard. And also we have a lot of risks in doing business on the North Korea. We have to be mindful about that as well. You have to be meticulous about the conditions. You have to be thorough. And also you have to give yourself a lot of time to have the full evaluation. And also the third-party checkup is necessary. Once you make the contract is done, then you cannot avoid abiding by the contract. Therefore, how much time you spend on making the contract is not enough. So you have to have the condition that you can know everything. You should not be rushed by other competitors. So it doesn't mean that you cannot give yourself a lot of time, even if you have competitors. Another thing that I can recommend is to have a consortium. So maybe small hands come together to have a big business. So that will be also a very good way of doing business in North Korea. Chairman Chun, would you like to now wrap up because of the time constraint? I'm very sorry to disturb you. Okay, because I had so many things to tell you. That is why I'm overspending my time. But you have to understand the doing business, and also you have to understand the Foreign Investment Act in North Korea. Give yourself full time to know everything about North Korea. So I have to stop here. I'm very sorry that I overspent my time, but I have so many more things to tell you. But thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. So starting from the 1992, the Chairman Chun has been engaged in the various economic cooperation projects, and he shared with us his experience. And he said that we really have to understand North Korea, and we also have to understand North Korea's investment law and various social systems. And in fact, everything that he talked about is related with the industrial complex. The Gaeseong Industrial Complex, we already have the well-devised programs for taxation and everything. And we have a long history of the economic cooperation between the two Koreas. And he said that we don't really have any kind of successful case, but I want to raise objection against that. I believe that the Gaeseong Industrial Complex is the single gem in the history of the inter-Korean economic cooperation. It's truly a successful case, although it's currently suspended. Now, finally, last but not least, we'd like to invite the last speaker, Cho Young-mi from Korea's Women's Movement for Peace. She's the executive director of the organization, and currently she is working as a consultant for the Global Now campaign in Korea. And also the director, Cho Young-mi. She is a member of the Public Diplomacy Support Network under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for a kind introduction. My name is Cho Young-mi, and thank you for inviting me to this auspicious forum. I personally admire the Kim Young-un, the president of Korea Logistics Forum, and listening to his presentation, I was amazed and deeply impressed. And also, I'd like to thank all the hard work and dedication of President Choi Kwang-cheol, who is serving in CAPA. And also, I'd like to thank all the panelists for their passion and dedication. And it's indeed a great honor for me to be part of this great panel. And also, I would like to thank the Lee Byung-moon, president of the Gaeseong Industrial District Foundation, who organized this forum, as well as the former leaders of the organization and all the staff who put together this session. Thank you very much. And also we have audiences on site who wear the Gaeseong Industrial Complex badges on their jacket. And also I'd like to thank all the participants for joining us online. Today I would like to briefly talk about some of the issues that have been overlooked when it comes to the Gaeseong Industrial Complex, which is about females. Earlier we had a very good news that the telecommunication line between the two Koreas was recovered, and there was a growing expectation that the communications and the exchanges between the two Koreas can be resumed. But still there was a saying that it's better to err on the side of caution and we should not be too overly optimistic. But aside from the pessimism or the optimism, in fact, for those who are residing on the Korean Peninsula, they are the ones who are affected most with the changes and swings of the situations on the Korean Peninsula. So we talked about people on the borderline, and in fact, they are the ones who are most affected. And therefore, all kinds of the instability and the geopolitical conflicts, these all have the ramifications, especially for those who reside there. And since Korea is technically at war and Korea is under national division, and therefore we shouldn't politicize this national division issue, and we have to engage in uniform efforts to put the Korean War to an official end. And for this, women, they have engaged in various efforts to pursue peace from the grassroots level. I will not elaborate on the history of how women were involved in this kind of activity, but from their day-to-day lives, from the very grassroots levels, women have stood up to fight for peace, and such their efforts are now being expanded to East Asia and Pacific area. And part of example is the Korea Peace Now, which is a global campaign. And this campaign, it's a global campaign, but at the same time, it created several grassroots networks and organizations in the United States. And the members of these organizations are now working hard for various kinds of advocacy activities. And also we work with the UN members, the US Congress, and we also pursue the connectiveness between the different countries by overcoming the divisive borders. And I believe that putting the end to the Korean War and the establishment of peace regime, that these are the centerpieces of our work. And recently in the United States, they celebrate the Advocacy Week, and the members of the general public, they do have time to communicate with members of the National Congress. And because of the COVID-19, we held this event in a virtual format, and the Chairman Che and also other leaders of Korean Americans all participated. And also we held various campaigns through that event. These are all efforts to raise our voices in the international community to pursue the interests of the Korean Peninsula, and also this provide the venues and channels for the policymakers to come together and have very close communications. And also one thing that we focus so much on is that, as you know, a lot of countries, they have very negative, conservative bias against North Korea. So we try to change their perceptions and mindsets. And for this, we have to publish various kinds of policy reports. So the publication is another sector that we focus on. And regarding the Gaeseong Industrial Complex, we have published 2 reports, and one of them is here. This is describing the damage that the North Korean people suffer because of the UN sanctions. And if you go to the Korea Peace Now website, you can get the free download of this report. And also this February, to the policymakers in the United States, we actually sent a letter calling for peace on the Korean Peninsula. And we published the past peace report that advocate the values of peace to improve relations with North Korea. And it also touches upon the things that are related with the Gaeseong Industrial Complex. And the report says that the Gaeseong Industrial Complex is a milestone event that shows the possibility of building peace on the Korean Peninsula. And therefore, it's a symbol of Korea's peace movement. And workers both from South and North Korea, they work together there and build peace together. So that's why the Gaeseong Industrial Complex does have a very historical significance and meaning, and we are very frustrated by the shutdown of this complex. And also, as the sanctions against North Korea got intensified, and it has been broadened to cover almost every sectors of the society. And then the UN agencies and other international organizations called for the need to assess the impact of sanctions, especially to the lives of the general public. In fact, the sanctions are imposed in order to put pressure on political leaders. However, it's the very general public that are hit hardest by sanctions. So I think that this is something that we have to pay heed to. And when it comes to sanctions, who suffered the most? If you look at the situations in North Korea, in fact, there was a comparison study for 146 countries, and it says that the international sanctions disproportionately affect the women. So if you look into the situations in North Korea, you can see that the women and children, they are the ones who are hit hardest, who suffer the most due to sanctions. North Korean women, they take care of their families and society, but at the same time, they are bread earners as well. So they do have the dual roles. And they have the dual social expectations, and that increased the toll on the women in North Korea, especially like the textile industry, where a lot of women workers are there, and the textile industry was directly affected by sanctions. And also most of the workers in the Gaeseong Industrial Complex worked in textile industry as well. However, so far, all the damage and the sufferings of the females have been invisible, and they were not known well. And only in the beginning of the Gaeseong Industrial Complex, there were about 6,000 workers, but later they increased to 50,000, and most of them were actually female workers. And therefore, female issue is something that should never be overlooked when we talk about the Gaeseong Industrial Complex. And also, we have to understand how sanctions disproportionately affect the women and children. And for this, I think that we have to come up with more in-depth reports. And therefore, when we call for the reopening of the Gaeseong Industrial Complex, and also I know that we do have the foundation to fight for this. And I think that they have to understand that this disproportionate sufferings of females. And as for the human rights issues in North Korea, yes, various reports have been published. And they claim that the sanctions and the ensuing sufferings and the disasters, again, they heavily affect women. after the COVID-19, a lot of people stay at home, but because of that, the domestic violence and the suicide all increased. Especially, these social problems are prevalent among female. So this again shows how this kind of social issues disproportionately affect female. So we have to think about not just the economic security, but also security for people. And in the sense, I believe that even for our movements to resume the Gaeseong Industrial Complex, we have to take care of women in particular, and economic development, the governance structure, and also politics and social. In every aspect, I hope that we could fight for empowerment of females. And also, while pursuing peace, the logistics system has to be improved. And we also have to resume the human exchanges between the two Koreas. And through that, we will be able to build a space where we can pursue peace together, and where we can deepen and broaden our understandings for one another. So I hope that this could be the missions for the foundation, and I want to be part of this effort. And so in our lives, what should be our focus? Yes, establishing infrastructure is important, building a system is important, and also understanding legislation and system. Of course, that's very important. However, we really have to pay attention to the lives of workers and what kind of discriminations they suffer from. And so we have to make efforts to change the status quo. And the U.S. State Department, they extended the ban on North Korea. And it's really frustrating to hear that. And South Korea, again, I believe that we have to step up our efforts to normalize ties with North Korea. And looking at what happened in Afghanistan, again, we were reminded of the tragedy of the war and violence. And again, that reminded us the importance and the values of peace. So you can see that the U.S. troops withdrew from the Afghanistan, but all the tolls will be borne by people in Afghanistan, and this gives us a very painstaking and important lesson to all of us. So I sincerely hope that we all could bear this in mind and march forward together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cho. Big orientation toward unification should be continued with the sustainable exchanges. And the essence of the sustainable exchange is about people, according to her, especially women of all the people. With the example of Afghanistan, we know that the biggest victims are the women and children. That is very clearly visible to us. Also, the biggest pillar of the society for the social production is also from women. When we talk about the North Korea, whether they have been locked in or locked out, we have a lot of arguments about that. In order to understand the North Korea more, we also have to know more about the sanctions and sanction-related activities on North Korea. The damage on the women and children because of the sanctions should be understood. And also, she was able to give out the report on the road toward unification in 2010. Also, this year in July, the VNR was also used for reporting out under UN. For example, the fertilizers and agricultural products. And the voluntary report was also issued for the first time on the 17 countries. We have to have more study on the North Korea. We also have to give out the reports about the study on North Korea to the rest of the world. As George Floyd incident was the problem in the U.S. being strangled, not to be able to breathe at all. The sanctions also means the strangling of the breathing for North Korea. there is also a voice heard saying that we have to rethink about the meanings of the sanction and the damage of the people. People at the top of North Korea will not be affected, and less affected than the people who are at the bottom, especially women and children. We have to understand what the real problems are about these giving sanctions to North Korea. That is how we are just approaching these problems. Thank you very much for your input, and would like to also spend more time by having other discussions. But I was not a good timekeeper today. I only have 5 minutes to go. We have to keep our promises about the time of ending. So very sorry about that, but I only have 5 minutes. If you have any questions from the floor or the audience as well as the online watchers, we will be entertaining them. Do we have any questions? I do not see any hands or questions, so now is the time for wrapping up. I really want to give all the opportunities to all the people, but I'm really stricken with time, so my apology. Thank you very much for understanding. Mr. Chan, would you like to give us a word of wrapping up? When we have the cooperation between the North and South Korea and to work for the Northeast Asia peace and cooperation, do we really have the benefits in return? Are we just excessively giving and giving all the time? That's a question actually we receive. In 1997, there's a theory of North Korea going down, and also the cost of unification will be gigantic and astronomical, they say. All these things are heard at all. And whoever wins the race for the unification, that will be so much expensive, they say. And these kind of reports coming from the Japan institution says that that will be a tremendous cost, and that has been circulated among the conservatives in Korea. They have been also exported to other countries, and also expended meaning of such report is coming back to Korea. This is a vicious circle. Whoever wins the race, we have to have the benefits in sight. Therefore, if we have the connection of North and South Korea, we can have more benefits. But what if we don't have the direct connection of North and South Korea for our future peace? So as you said also, we do have some possibility of not having to connect directly of North and South Korea. According to a research given by the Economic Institute, we had the 0.8% of the economic growth, and in 2013, that is 0.5%, and by the mid-2030 will have only 0.2% of growth rate. That will be very pessimistic. And also by 2030, because of the reduction of the population in Korea, our growth engine will be just dying down. When we talk about the North and South Korea, we also have the indication of the people in the Northeast Asia. So inter-Korean relations will be emanating its effect to the rest of the Northeast Asian countries. So by 2045, the South Korea can achieve the level of number 2 in the world in terms of the economic growth. This is another extreme case of reporting, actually. But we do have diverse opinions like these. So when we have the economic cooperation between North and South Korea, another report says that at least 1% of the economic increase or growth will be achieved. So we are aiming at the bigger budget now, so we can also have the 0.3% of the increase of the growth. So if we want to have the connection of North and South Korea, on the one hand, they say that it will be aggravating the situation. On the other hand, they say that it will be only good for both sides. Now is the time for us not to have the operation of the Gaeseong Industrial Complex. Probably we should reopen the Gaeseong Industrial Complex. Of course, Gaeseong Industrial Complex does not mean everything, but if and when we open the dialogue between the two countries and open the commerce, Gaeseong Industrial Complex should be opened. So this is one example of a special zone, and with that model that can be very successful, we can open another and another one in other areas. Korea is the only country to have the success of having one special zone to expand to another. So if we can be successful in Gaeseong Industrial Complex, we can go deeper into the North Korea to the northern part. There's no other way to avoid this. but the road is blocked now. But if we on a journey, sometimes we are in a dead end. Dead end is not about the physical flow dead end. This is about the mental flow dead end. We can find bypass. We can find other routes. So there is no dead end physically at all. Although the road is long, we have to have a continuous step-by-step movement. All the men and women, all together, we have to go along together toward our peace and prosperity. And maybe that's the essence you would like to give us today. I know that we have online, offline audience. A lot of people are here with us today as well. Today is not the end of the story. Today's discussion will be continued in the future, and it will be replaced by better opinions and better ideas. Thank you very much for all the participants, Mr. Kim and Mr. Choi, Mr. Tan, and Ms. Jo as presenter and discussants. So all of you, I thank you very much for your ardent participation. My thanks to all the audience as well. This is it. Thank you very much.